everyone to episode number 8 of the Lifestyle Empowerment Podcast. On today's episode, let's talk about fat loss. Go over some of the tips and tricks and some strategies that I have used over the years for achieving fat loss, whether that be with myself or with clients, and the experience that I've gained working with multiple coaches. So many people, their primary goals tend to be fat loss. You'll even have some pretty sick individuals that will come to you and they're still looking to obtain fat loss. Now, this is totally fine because achieving fat loss can help with some, internal health issues and whatnot, decreasing inflammation and such. Now, it's important to understand, though, that the act of fat loss in itself is not the most healthiest thing. But you need that stressor of a caloric deficit in order to achieve that fat loss. So there's some ways you want to go about it to not only obtain it in a healthy manner, but an efficient manner as well, without maladapting your metabolism. So I'll get a little more into that. So where you want to begin first is not actually focusing on the fat loss if you have not already taken these steps. And what I mean by that is you want to establish at least a maintenance level of a caloric intake. So what you can do is you'll see here, I'll pull it up on the screen for those viewers that are watching, but I have a Harris Benedict calculator open right now, and that can give you a rough idea of where you should be. Now, it's important to know that your metabolism is going to adapt to what you're eating. So this Harris Benedict equation could say that you need, that your maintenance calories is 2,500. But if you've been eating 3,500 calories consistently, you can guarantee that your maintenance calories are higher than 2,500. So it's based off of what you have been currently eating for an existing period of time. But where I do use it is, let's say, okay, so in this case here, we have a 135-pound female, 35 years old, 5'7". Her basal metabolic rate is nearly 1,400 calories. So if you have been eating 1,500 calories and exercising and just living, you better increase your caloric intake prior to trying to achieve fat loss. You're not going to really have any room to create fat loss because you simply burn just 1,400 calories breathing, like just to stay alive. Now you add on stress, exercise, all the stuff along that nature, you're expending quite a few calories. As you'll see, according to this equation, this person could potentially be burning up to 2,400 calories exercising 4 to 5 times a week plus their lifestyle. So if you're only eating 1,500 calories, your metabolism is going to adapt to that. And this is where you hear of things like the downregulation of hormones and thyroid and such. You just don't have the necessary substrate to build thyroid, to build hormones. And this is why you end up plateauing, or one of the reasons why you could plateau. So it's important to be eating sufficient amount of calories prior to beginning this. Now, calories of the right amount of food, or the right choices of food that is. It's pretty easy to get 2,500 calories from, not the greatest of choices. So 2,500 calories from, what we deem as healthy whole foods, but ones that you digest well, because, you could read all over the internet that something is healthy for you, but if you don't digest well, it gives you bloating, brain fog, whichever. I wouldn't recommend eating them. So work your way up to at least a maintenance level of calories. If you've already been doing that, then you're good to go. But if you haven't, do this for at least 4 weeks. At least 4 weeks, making sure your sleep is good. You're getting 7 to 8 hours per night, more if you can, if applicable. You're managing your stress. If you're a female, you have, optimal menstrual cycles, good cognitive function, low levels of inflammation. Just make sure you're in an all-around good, healthy place prior to beginning a fat loss phase. Because if you're not, you're going to really struggle and you're going to run into a lot of roadblocks and just overall not feel very well doing it. So many of us know, a lot of us have been there. So take the time to really, eat the food and make sure you're coming from a healthy place. Once you have established that, then you can begin your fat loss phase. So what I'll say prior to going into a fat loss phase, this is my personal outlook on it. What I like to do with myself and my clients is I don't start with cardio when I begin a fat loss phase. And the reason being is because you only have so many tools in your toolbox. And if you're pulling them all out in the beginning, you're not going to have a lot left down the road, right? So I say obtain your cardiovascular benefits prior to starting the fat loss phase, which is not that difficult. And why we want to do this is because, once again, you adapt. So let's say the first time ever doing cardio, we'll just make up numbers. You burned 350 calories doing an hour of cardio. The more you do that, remember, your body is a miraculous meat suit. It's going to adapt to that, and it's going to become more efficient. Your metabolism isn't crashing or whichever. You're just becoming more efficient, and you're using less energy to do the same task, right? And this is why we tend to like increase cardio, increase things, and, increase volume and so on and so forth. You're just adapting to everything. So get the cardiovascular adaptations for the health purposes, but save it later for more expenditure, which I'll get into. So coming into your fat loss phase, if you have been eating around maintenance calories, I would start with just like a lower decrease in calories, like anywhere from 100 to 250. Now, if you've been eating like quite a bit above, so as mentioned, like let's say you're eating, 3,000 when your maintenance is supposedly 2,400 calories, or even up to 35, then you can make a drastic drop, and you should get a good response in doing so. Research has actually shown, we'll say for natural individuals, enhanced as well, but a cyclical approach of like deep deficits for anywhere from like 2 to 3 weeks, and then going back into a maintenance or a surplus, kind of like resetting, and then going back, doing this cyclical approach seems to promote good fat loss over time. Now, if you're in crunch of a deadline, that's a little bit different story, but let's talk about this in the context of trying to achieve this in the healthiest manner. So start by lowering anywhere up to 250 calories, and just monitor. There's a few symptoms you can monitor. I like monitoring waking heart rate for stress levels. If you see that coming up, you can tell the body's getting too stressed. If you have the option of tracking your heart rate variability, that goes a long way as well. Obviously, your body weight and body composition are going to be very huge. I more so am focused on body composition because you could get no change in the scale weight. And the reason being that this could occur, but you could see yourself tightening up and looking a little leaner, is because think of it as inflammation decreases, you become more insulin sensitive. And I'll say this is just one of the factors, but you become more insulin sensitive and you begin to store more nutrients. So you kind of fill out more, and that sometimes causes the scale not to change. It's not a bad thing. That's why we don't want to get wrapped up too much in the scale, because there is a difference between fat loss and weight loss. Weight loss can be easily achieved just by dropping water and carbohydrates, because you're just going to decrease glycogen in water. So you'll see a change in the scale, but that doesn't mean you are burning fat. So we want to make the focus fat loss. So it's definitely not about big scale changes. Unless you're like rather obese, then you'll probably see some big scale changes. But if you're just like, average body weight, let's say, and you're just trying to shed, some fat, get a little leaner, you're probably not going to see drastic changes in the scale. Not to mention too, like if you're doing this properly, you're going to want to build muscle. And I've had this conversation with many female clients like that I've worked with over the years. It's like, you will probably never be the weight you want to be or that you had in your head because you have built muscle. So like for you to get to that weight, you would have to starve yourself and deteriorate your muscle. So you will never be that weight. So this is why we focus on body composition, because if your goal is 115 pounds, well, you can get there without a six pack or without a flat stomach, we'll say. Not everyone wants six pack, but let's say your goal is you want 115 pounds, but in the back of your mind, you actually want a flat stomach. Well, you can achieve that flat stomach at 125 pounds. But what could really mess with your psyche is like, okay, well, I got this flat stomach, but I'm not 115 pounds. So be careful with the goals that you try to set. Like when we're talking fat loss, really focus on body composition. Because that is where you're going to see the biggest changes if fat loss is occurring. Not saying you won't see in the scale, right? Just don't get wrapped up in the scale. Everyone's talked about that a million times, right? So don't reduce calories too fast, because once again, you will adapt to everything. So what happens is a caloric deficit will promote more cortisol. It's catabolic. Well, it's nutrient partitioning. Let's not call it catabolic. Let's call it nutrient partitioning. It'll break down from certain areas to supply other areas, is how I would rather people look at that. So it's stress. Calorie deficit is stress though. And so that accumulative effect of stress will impact things like the thyroid, for example. So the thyroid is your chief regulator of your metabolism. And think of that, it's super, super important, but in the case of this context, think of it as that's what's going to help you achieve, one of the things help you achieve fat loss. So if your thyroid starts sensing lots of cortisol, it's going to essentially downregulate and you're going to produce less thyroid hormone, or you're going to convert more to an inactive form of thyroid or just not really convert at all. And that's where you'll see high levels of T4, high levels of reverse T3, which will take up space on the cell, on the nucleus, but not do anything, is what reverse T3 is. So you don't want to drop them too drastically. Also hormones. High levels of cortisol can create a phenomenon in the body, I guess you call it, known as the pregnenolone steal. So pregnenolone is the precursor to all your hormones. So if you don't have enough substrates because you're in a calorie deficit, which also means a nutrient deficit, if you don't have enough substrate to create that energy, it's going to take it from the hormones. Same with, overtraining in a calorie deficit will burn through cholesterol, which builds hormones. So this is why we do these cyclical approaches, or this is why you hear about refeeds or free meals and such like that, right? Like high levels of insulin can actually free up testosterone, things like that. I'll get a little more into that here, but essentially just don't lower your calories too fast unless you've been starting from a very high point. But once again, only do that for like 2, maybe 3 weeks tops, and then go back into a maintenance or surplus. And that is the reason why we go into the maintenance or the surplus, is so we can tell the thyroid, hey, it's okay to make more thyroid hormone, do your thing. And also, hey, look, we have the necessary substrate to build these hormones, because like testosterone, we all know, nutrient partitioning, muscle building, super important, even in females. Estrogen gets a bad rep, super important, super important. Insulin sensitivity, and fat burning, high levels, yes, can cause fat storage, but progesterone, super important for calming, for fat utilization. Like hormones are crucially important in terms of fat loss. This is why bodybuilders can do these 16-week long preps. And like a lot of other systems get taxed pretty bad, but they're taking exogenous hormones. So they don't have to worry about, if they're taking T3, they don't have to worry about the thyroid declining. They're ingesting the active form of thyroid. They're ingesting testosterone. They're ingesting, it's usually testosterone, which then, gives a little bit of estrogen. But a lot of guys too think that they really, really want to drive estrogen down, right? And then where they'll get the double-edged sword of that is like, okay, well, it promotes results, but there comes a lot of other issues with that. So you just want healthy levels of estrogen. Instead of trying to tank it, just make sure you're detoxifying it properly. But that's a whole separate subject. So hormones are important. Thyroid, super important, fat loss, okay? Liver detoxification, super important. A lot of people don't understand, I probably said this 100 times, detox gets such a bad rep. And that is because of skinny tea, stuff like that. And then, the rebuttalment to that is, oh, I have a liver and kidneys, I'm detoxifying. The reality is you probably are not detoxifying that well. It requires a lot of nutrients to detoxify. And your liver is already being burned on a daily basis. Now throw a calorie deficit on top of that. Detoxification is not important for immediate survival. So this is where that really takes a hit. And now what happens is toxins are stored in fat cells. They're fat soluble. So as you begin to release these fat cells and burn this fat, you are releasing these toxins back into the system. So this actually is what can create a lot of plateauing, not necessarily always metabolism adaptation. It can be the fact that you're not detoxifying properly. So these free radicals, these heavy metals, these toxins themselves, these bacteria, everything's, these inflammagens, it's all just recirculating, causing more inflammation, which inflammation will slow the rate of fat burning because it's going to reject fat, essentially. Think of that in a very simplistic way. And then you also have your endocrine disruptors, which start messing a lot of things up. And then you get higher levels of estrogen because it can be estrogenic and just a whole boatload of problems. So don't let anybody tell you that detox is stupid. It is super, super important. What is stupid is the way most of the mainstream industry goes about it. But you need the necessary substrates to detoxify properly. This is where a lot of micronutrients come in and things like B vitamins and stuff. So yes, we need a caloric deficit to achieve fat loss, but we don't want to run a massive micronutrient deficit. This is why supplementation can be really important in fat loss, which I'll go over after. So making sure you're detoxifying, making sure hormones are staying optimal. Once again, you can supplement, go over that. I don't mean performance enhancing drugs. And then obviously like thyroid and stuff. So how you do that is that cyclical approach. Lower your calories 250. Hell, if you're high, go to 500 calories less than what you've been eating. Do that for up to 3 weeks and then go back to, let's say you're eating 3,000 calories, go back to that 3,000 calories, or at least maintenance level. There's your refeed week. You can do it anywhere from 3 days to a week. Some people can get away with refeed meals, just like really, really big meals, because the high levels of cortisol and the stress could be what's inhibiting them. So having that big flux of calories and yummy food or whichever it may be can really lower cortisol levels, can raise insulin, as mentioned, which can free up testosterone from sex hormone binding globulin and just stimulate, an all-around process to help keep the metabolism ticking along, right? So there's some strategies that you can try there, but I personally think the best is 3 weeks of calorie deficit, 1 week of maintenance or surplus. Now, let's talk about the training around fat loss. Once again, you get lots of misconstrued information or discrepancy or whatever terminology you would like to use around it because of the bodybuilding industry. You see a lot of people training super, super hard and burning themselves into the ground and all this kind of stuff. Well, once again, they can do that because they're taking hormones. So they're repairing, they're recovering. That if you go look at my training stimuli video where I talk about the bar of recovery, this is why they can do this in a caloric deficit. Natural individuals are not as lucky. You really want to be careful with your training. I personally believe no one needs more than 4 times per week in a caloric deficit for training. Training is not what's going to drive the majority of your fat loss. I'll get a little more into that, but it is good for muscle retention and hormone production. So I'm not saying don't train. Yes, you can achieve fat loss without training. I could probably do a separate podcast on that, but just keep your training 4 times a week. Do lower volume with less failure. High volume and lots of failure equates to lots of inflammation. That will slow the rate of fat loss down, sometimes completely stop it in extreme enough cases. So it's super important that you are not training yourself into a hole. You can see it like when these people go to step on stage and stuff, they're like kind of watery and everything. It's because of their training, right? This is why they'll tell you like it's really catching on to stop legs like 3 weeks out of a show, because legs, they're such a big muscle group, can equate to lots of volume, can create to lots of inflammation. So this is why you stop them. It's so you can have more strided legs and stuff, right? So be careful with your training. Enhanced people obviously have more room for error in this subject here, but as a natural individual, just 4 times max, 3 to 4 times, lower volume, watch your failure, okay? Now, here's a cool trick that you can do with the training though. For the week or the 3 days or however many days, or one big refeed day or whichever you choose to do for your strategy, you can use the training when you go into those higher calories, and then you can do more volume. You can utilize more of that food. You can partition more of those nutrients. So then that's the time to train harder. I still wouldn't train as if I was in a high caloric surplus and aiming to build lots of muscle. But if you refer to both the training stimuli video and the video I made where I gained 6.6 pounds in 5 days, there's that training phase with the shorter rest periods that would be great during that time to partition those nutrients, really refill those glycogen stores, and just utilize the higher amount of calories. So that's where you can really utilize training, still only 4 times max a week, okay? It's about recovery, not burning yourself into the ground, okay? So doing this should really help prevent that extreme metabolism adaptation, or what we like to call decline, which you're not breaking your metabolism or anything, you're just adapting. As mentioned, you are a miraculous meat suit. Your body will do whatever it takes to survive. So cyclical approaches for the win. Some people can get away with the chronic deficit though. Some people can get away making only lowering 100 calories, cycling their cardio. So that brings me to that. Your two biggest drivers of your fat loss is going to be your nutrition manipulation. So like whether that be carb cycling, fat cycling, high calories, low calories, everything that we've been talking about, and your NEAT, your non-exercise activity thermogenesis. That is how much you move in a day. That's your talking, your fidgeting, your walking, whichever. That is going to make up the second biggest portion of your caloric deficit other than your BMR. So this is why you read steps, 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 get lots of steps, because that's what's going to really help increase that caloric deficit without tons of stress, unlike the training. The training is going to create inflammation. It's going to create more stress on the adrenals, the liver, you name it, where walking does not. Walking should be the opposite of stress. Walking should be activating your rest and digest, your parasympathetic nervous system, calming you down. It should be promoting good caloric deficit without the excessive stress that training can bring on. So this is why steps are so important. So this is where cardio can come in, yes, as extra caloric expenditure, but as mentioned, you adapt, right? So cycle your cardio as well, and then just get more steps in, right? There's like a lot of people don't realize how important your environment is to fat loss. And what I mean by that in the context of this is, if you just go to your 9-to-5 job every day and you come home and you cook dinner and you watch TV or whichever, and you still try, like, you do your meditation and you get your steps in and everything, but you still find like you're not getting the best results. Well, that's because your brain's very good at associating environment, and you can become very complacent to stress and like negativity and stuff. So subconsciously, you're still creating a lot of stress being in a specific environment 24/7. So you need to take time to get out of that environment, okay? Like I say this because I'm here in Calgary, Alberta. Get out to the mountains. Like if you're in my area, they're an hour away. Get out to the mountains. Go for a hike. Go for a walk along the lakes or whatever. Get out of the city. Like you'd be surprised how much, like, you'll get people that are like, okay, they're kind of sticking, all this stuff, and they go and do something like that, and they come back and they lose a bunch of weight and feel a bunch better. Right? And that's because they've gotten out of their environment and they've had a massive reduction in stress hormones. And if you're going hiking, you're also getting a bunch of steps in. It's a lot of activity, right? So you have to get out of your environment. If you're not doing that, it's going to be a struggle, right? We just become so complacent and so like autopilot in today's society that's another big reason why we are really struggling with obesity and lack of fat loss. So I'll say it 100 times, get out of your environment, go somewhere, do something fun, get out of the city, get some fresh air, get around water, get around trees. It's been proven time and time again from research and science that this is super, super beneficial for you, no matter what goal you are trying to achieve, okay? Because cortisol and a calorie deficit is just going to keep getting higher and higher. So we got to keep those cortisol levels down, because chronic levels of cortisol not only impact the thyroid negatively and every other system, but it can become pro-inflammatory rather than anti-inflammatory, okay? So it's super important to manage those cortisol levels. And yeah, like I said, your steps, because you could do, let's say like -30, don't want to get outside. Okay. That is where you could do like your cardio, but maybe just some steps on the treadmill. Maybe not push your heart rate super high to like 150, especially if your program isn't calling for it. Just get some steps on there. I always try to say aim for 10,000 steps. If you're a kind of individual, because I do work with some people who get up to 20,000, we just increase their food intake because that's a lot of steps. So you need to be able to support that. But steps, walking, that stuff is big time key for driving a caloric deficit in a healthy manner. Okay, just lots of movement. Because for those that have gotten down to lower levels of body fat, so I got down to single digit body fat one time, and everybody knows I'm super like hyperactive. I talk lots, I talk fast, I fidget a lot, I'm always moving. When I was down to those low levels of calories and getting to that single digit body fat percentage, I barely moved. Like I barely did anything. It was really rough. Your brain just doesn't work. And I mean, hey, that's part of the process. As mentioned, achieving fat loss, especially to those levels, is definitely not healthy. The end result of optimal fat loss, though, is what is healthy. And this is why we want to achieve fat loss. But yeah, just use movement as your biggest driver of your deficit. Because yeah, you will find that as you get leaner, you will want to move less, and that's where that discipline has to come in and just make yourself move. This is why like some people who work labor intensive jobs do really well with fat loss, because they got no choice. They got to earn that paycheck, right? So that's a big reason why is their NEAT, non-exercise activity thermogenesis, is pretty high. So and as for like the cardio, again, when it comes to actual like high heart rates and cardiovascular benefits, I do not like to use high intensity interval training in a caloric deficit. That one I save for caloric surpluses. But your cardiovascular adaptations, they're rather easy to achieve, and you can hold on to them for quite a while. You'd be surprised how long you can, or how easy you can achieve these adaptations and how long you can hold on to these adaptations. So use cardio sparingly. But if you feel you need it, yeah, don't be afraid to implement some of it as long as you've not been doing it chronically. Okay. And then so when it comes to like nutritional strategies, other than the actual caloric cycling, so 3 weeks of a deficit, 1 week of a surplus or maintenance at the very least, you could do things like carb cycling. So 3 days of the week, you could do lower carbohydrates. And then for like 1 or 2 days of the week, you do, about a moderate level of carbohydrates. And then for 1 or 2 days, depending on how you're responding, you can do really high carbohydrates. So how I set that up is I try to keep calories the same. So let's say you're eating 2,000 calories. I'll keep the protein usually the same, but I'll adjust the fats and the carbs. So if I'm going low carb, I'll increase my fats, but decrease my carbs, but maintain 2,000 calories. Because if you have those big fluctuations in calories, it can cause the metabolism to adapt quicker than you want it to. So stick at 2,000, but adjust the carbohydrates and the fats. And then on a mod day, drop the fats a bit, bring the carbs a bit. And then on a high day, although I made a podcast on the importance of dietary fats, this is where you can get away with really low levels of fat because you're only going to do it for a day or two. So you can go down to 10 grams of fats, but you can bump them carbohydrates up to like 250, 500, depending who you are. I go up to 1,000 myself personally, right? So carb cycling is a very good tool. It's shown lots of benefits, right? That's probably one of your best nutritional strategies when it comes to achieving fat loss. Later down the road, I say don't start with carb cycling unless you got like a deadline. But if you got time, don't start with carb cycling right away. Save that for a little later in the deficit, okay? And then how you would know to utilize that is really watch your weight and your body composition. So if you're starting like your weight's kind of plateauing and you're getting kind of watery and inflamed, run a high day, like experiment, right? Run 2 high days, see how you respond. If the first high day you drop some weight and you tighten up a little, awesome. You do a second high day, you might tighten up even more and drop a little more. If you don't, then you might only need 1 high day. Now, once again, though, those high carb days are where you can utilize glycolytically demanding training to really partition those nutrients, okay? So just experiment. You got to experiment. You got to learn your body. You got to figure out what works for you using these strategies and just base it off of not only symptoms like performance in the gym. Like, yes, performance is going to decline in a caloric deficit. There's no way around that. Strength is probably going to, you're going to lose some strength and whatnot. But as long as it's not severely tanking, then you're on the right track. Or if it starts to, that's when you start to carb up or go into that maintenance or caloric surplus for a week just to help try to maintain performance the best you can. That's another symptom that you can watch. But watching the body composition is probably your best bet. Now, that does take a trained eye. It took me quite a few years to understand what's what and what's affecting what, and what does this mean when you look at this and stuff. But sometimes it's kind of obvious. Sometimes like 1 carb day, you can see such a drastic reduction in water and see yourself tighten up quite a bit that you're like, okay, yeah, that worked. I know what I'm doing for that, right? But the nitty gritty stuff, that's where it kind of gets a little technical and just takes experience, right? Yeah, those are majority of my tips for the general population for when it comes to fat loss and achieving a healthy fat loss. So another way that you can really achieve an optimal healthy fat loss is, yes, supplementation. And I'm not meaning performance enhancing drugs. And like I said, in no way, shape, or form am I saying that those are bad. If you are competing, good luck. You're going to need to do them, like unless you're in the natural division. But if you're not, which most people I know are not, you're not going to be able to compete with the other competitors who are running performance enhancing drugs. So just seek out professional help with that, okay? But in terms of supplementation, so magnesium, we all know nutrient deficit, or the caloric deficit is also promoting a nutrient deficit. Even in a caloric surplus, magnesium is hard to get. So lots of magnesium bisglycinate, very calming, very important for so many reactions in the body, okay? Super crucial in a caloric deficit, super crucial no matter what. Multivitamin, because once again, you're eating less food, so you're getting less nutrients. So multivitamin is a good way to fill in the gaps. Get a quality multivitamin though. Do not go to Walmart or Superstore or Shoppers Drug Mart or, wherever, if you're from the States, whatever. Get a quality researched, whatever, like practitioner multivitamin. Okay. It goes a very, very long way. You also going to have to cut like a lot of fiber. Your reduction in food is going to really reduce fiber. So you might have to look at a fiber supplementation. Make sure you're having a bowel movement every single day so you're not recycling toxins, inflammagens, and bacteria and such, okay? So fiber comes in. Stomach acid. If you refer back to my supplement podcast, stomach acid, you're losing a lot of nutrients. You're creating a lot of stress. Stomach acid is going to take a hit, which could further decrease your micronutrient intake. So I think HCl is very important. Once again, seek professional advice though. Theanine. Theanine promotes calming. It promotes GABA, your calming neurotransmitter. It can help lower cortisol levels. It can help with sleep, all that stress management, all that stuff. B vitamins, super crucial for methylation, for energy production, energy transfer, food assimilation, very, very important. As mentioned, we don't have reserves for B vitamins. So supplementing a methyl B complex can go a long way in a caloric deficit. I think electrolytes are really good. Having balanced electrolytes in the cell will really help with many, many things. So I think that's really good. On the aspect of calming, again, we could look at things like ashwagandha and relora, some adaptogens to keep cortisol levels lower. And then I really think glutathione is important because, as mentioned, detoxification is super important and it takes a hit. So glutathione is heavily involved in the detoxification process. So I think supplementing glutathione it can go a long way in a caloric deficit. By all means, do you need any of these? Some people don't. Some people got really good genetics, right? Not everybody does. Some people feel like crap trying to lose fat without supplementing certain things, right? So they can go a very, very long way. When we're talking thyroid, you can just get like a thyroid support. Like I prefer ones with a glandular, like the actual thyroid glandular, and then things like zinc, selenium, and such. Nutridine's got a good one, or Tonic C's got a good one. In Canada, it's kind of hard to find glandular, but it's probably out there. Just shoot me a DM or something. I can help you out there. And when you're talking hormones, look at things like boron, maca, chasteberry for progesterone, humanofort. But like if you're younger, these things can work pretty well for maintaining hormones. There's actually been research done. Nutrition Dynamic has a product called Jumpstart EC, which contains like all of these ingredients plus more. And they did research and it actually showed that the testosterone and like hormone levels went down by less than half compared to the other people that didn't use this stuff. So it actually really works for maintaining hormone levels. When you start to get into like, let's say 35 and up, okay, let's say 40 and up. Actually, no, let's say 35 and up. The way society is going, 35 and up, hormones really start to take a hit. This is where you can consult your doctor about hormone replacement therapy. Women in menopause, you're going to have a really hard time losing weight if you are not using hormone replacement therapy because you just no longer produce those hormones. So that is where you consult your doctor and speak with them about that. Get your levels checked, obviously. Like DHEA too, make sure that's, if that's low, you can look at DHEA as well. Really helps with energy and whatnot. But let's talk like on the natural side of things: magnesium, multivitamin, fiber, theanine, HCl, B vitamins, electrolytes, ashwagandha, relora, and things like a thyroid support and some natural hormone support can go a very, very long way. Now there's also carnitine. Carnitine is the enzyme that helps shuttle fat into the cell. Now, once again, you can't just take all the carnitine in the world. It means you're going to burn fat. Many other factors are at play with this. But let's say all as well. Carnitine can benefit you, but mainly in the injectable form, which is kind of for some people or for many people. But it's been shown that oral form isn't very effective. Where I like to use oral form is not really anything to do with fat. It's more about increasing nootropic absorption into the brain. So like brain performance enhancing supplements essentially. But injectable carnitine could potentially help with many factors actually too, like even autoimmune diseases and such like that. But in terms of fat loss, injectable carnitine can help. But there's the active injecting. So take that as you will. But once again, with all this advice and everything, this is just seek professional help, okay? Making sure you're doing the right thing, monitoring things properly, especially when it comes to like supplementation. But yeah, fat loss is not the easiest to achieve these days, as it seems, unless you got some really, really good genetics. I work with many people who really struggle to lose fat with where they are currently at. So there's lots of other things we have to do first prior to them losing fat. But you do all the right things, and fat loss will be much more easily obtained and less like daunting and dreadful kind of thing, unless you're getting down to those single-digit body fat percentages, and there's no way around it. It's just not a fun time. So anyways, hopefully that's some good information for everyone. Give me some feedback. It's it could go on forever, but hopefully that is something people can take away to help themselves better their results, and just be overall healthy and stuff. So thank you all those for listening in and watching in. Take care, everybody.